Chapter 1. When I first met Samuel, I thought he was the answer to my prayers. He was charming, kind, and most importantly, he didn't treat me like a fleeting romance. It felt real, grounded. After a year of dating, he proposed, and I couldn't have been happier. But that happiness, I've come to realize, was an illusion, a mirage in a desert of broken promises. "Samuel," I asked one evening, rubbing my belly gently, "when are we going to finalize the marriage certificate? The baby will be here soon." He glanced at me, distracted, while scrolling through his phone. "We'll do it soon, Madeline. I promise. But Carmen needs me right now. Jack's having trouble sleeping again, and she's not feeling well." I sighed. It was always Carmen. Carmen and Jack. Her calls were incessant. "Jack has a fever, Jack is crying, I'm too scared to be alone tonight, there's an emergency at school." Each excuse felt more contrived than the last, yet Samuel fell for them every time. Chapter 2. I stared at Samuel as he grabbed his coat and car keys, ready to rush to Carmen's aid yet again. "She can't keep calling you like this," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "She's your ex-wife, not your responsibility." "What about us? What about your unborn child?" Samuel sighed, his eyes softening with guilt, but he didn't stop. "Madeline, you know Jack is my priority. I can't let him suffer because of Carmen's shortcomings. He's just a kid." "And what about me, Samuel?" My voice cracked. "I'm carrying your child, but I'm always second to her. Do you even care how that makes me feel?" He paused briefly, but instead of answering, he muttered, "I'll be back later," and walked out the door. The sound of it closing behind him felt like a slap in the face. The weeks turned into months, and the pattern never changed. I couldn't count the number of times I'd planned a special evening for us, only to have it ruined by one of Carmen's sudden emergencies. One evening, I set up a quiet dinner at home. Candles flickered on the table, the scent of roast chicken wafting through the apartment. I wanted to remind Samuel of what we had before Carmen's constant intrusions. But as I waited, my phone buzzed with the inevitable message, "Samuel, sorry, Maddie. Jack's having a rough night. I'll try to be home later." I stared at the screen, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. I'd given him everything, my love, my support, even my patience, but it was never enough. Carmen always came first. The tipping point came one afternoon when I was organizing the nursery. I found a tiny pair of baby shoes I'd bought weeks ago, imagining how they'd look on our child. But as I held them, the weight of everything crashed down on me. Samuel walked in, looking tired but oblivious to my emotions. "Hey," he said absently, "I'm going to Jack's school tomorrow. He has a recital, and Carmen wants me to be there for moral support." I snapped. "Carmen wants you there? What about what I want, Samuel? What about what I need? I'm carrying your child, yet I feel like I don't exist to you anymore." He looked at me, startled. "Madeline, that's not fair, not fair?" I laughed bitterly. "What's not fair is that you let her control your life, and by extension, mine. She's your ex-wife, Samuel. When does she stop being the center of your universe?" "It's not like that," he argued, his voice rising. "I'm doing this for Jack." "Don't you dare hide behind Jack," I shot back. "This is about you not being able to let go of her. Admit it, you're still letting Carmen run your life, and it's ruining ours." He didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me like I'd said something unforgivable. From that moment on, things only got worse. Samuel grew colder, more distant. He started staying out later, claiming he was helping Carmen with Jack's bedtime routine or fixing something at her place. I began to wonder if he ever truly loved me, or if I was just a placeholder, a distraction from the chaos Carmen had left behind. Carmen, of course, didn't make things any easier. She seemed to relish my frustration, going out of her way to remind me of her presence in Samuel's life. One morning, as I scrolled through my phone, I saw a picture she'd posted on social media, Samuel and Jack at the park, smiling like a perfect little family. The caption read, "A day with the most important boys in my life." My blood boiled. I confronted Samuel that evening. Why does she keep posting these things? Do you even care how humiliating this is for me? He looked genuinely confused. Humiliating? Maddie, she's just sharing moments with Jack. It's not about you. Not about me? I echoed, incredulous. She's using those posts to remind me, and everyone else, that she still has a hold on you. And you let her? Samuel sighed heavily. I can't control what she does, Maddie. I'm just trying to keep the peace, for Jack's sake. As the months went by, I felt more and more isolated. The man I loved, the father of my child, was slipping away from me, and no matter what I did, I couldn't pull him back. I started spending more time at work, finding solace in my job and the kindness of my colleagues, especially Jason, my manager. Jason was the polar opposite of Samuel. Where Samuel dismissed my feelings, Jason listened. Where Samuel made excuses, Jason offered solutions. And where Samuel ignored me, Jason saw me. One evening, after another argument with Samuel, I broke down in the office. Jason found me sitting at my desk, tears streaming down my face. Madeline, he said gently, sitting beside me, what's wrong? I hesitated, embarrassed, but the words came spilling out, everything about Samuel, Carmen, and how trapped I felt. Jason listened quietly, his expression a mixture of sympathy and anger. You deserve better than this, he said firmly. You're strong, Madeline. Don't let them break you. His words stuck with me, planting a seed of resolve. Chapter 3, Samuel and Carmen's history loomed over my relationship like an unwelcome ghost. Though Samuel rarely spoke about it, the pieces I gathered painted a complicated picture. Carmen was his first love, the woman he thought he'd spend his life with. They married young, full of dreams, but their fairy tale unraveled quickly. She wasn't always this way, Samuel told me once during one of our rare heart-to-hearts. We were happy in the beginning. We wanted the same things, stability, a family, a home. His voice grew distant, as though he was remembering someone he hadn't seen in years. But things changed after Jack was born. I waited, hoping he'd elaborate, but he didn't. He never willingly talked about the end of their marriage. I learned the truth from Carmen herself one day, though her words were laced with venom. I ran into Carmen at a cafe near Samuel's office. I would have avoided her if she hadn't spotted me first. With a sly smile, she waved me over to her table. Madeline, she purred, what a surprise. How's my dear Samuel treating you these days? I ignored the jab and kept my tone neutral. He's fine, Carmen. How's Jack? Her smile widened. Oh, he's perfect, of course. Samuel's been such a doting father, always there for us when we need him. I'm sure you've noticed. I clenched my fists under the table, but I refused to take the bait. Instead, I asked the question that had been nagging at me for months. Why did you and Samuel get divorced? Her expression faltered for a split second before she recovered. He didn't tell you? She leaned forward, lowering her voice as though sharing a secret. Samuel and I were great together. But well, let's just say he's not the most exciting man in the world. I guess I got bored. Bored enough to cheat on him? I shot back, unable to hide the sharp edge in my voice. Carmen's eyes narrowed. Careful, Madeline. You don't want to make an enemy out of me. She leaned back in her chair, her smirk returning. Yes, I had an affair. With my childhood friend, of all people. Samuel caught us. I'll admit, it wasn't my proudest moment. But he didn't leave me right away. Oh no, he tried to fix things for Jack's sake. Such a noble man, isn't he? She rolled her eyes. Why didn't he fight for custody? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and curiosity. Her laugh was cold and hollow. Because Samuel's weak. He couldn't handle a custody battle. Besides, he knew Jack needed his mother more. And maybe, just maybe, he still loved me a little. After that conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about how Samuel had stayed with her even after her betrayal. Did he love her so much that he couldn't let go? Or was it just for Jack's sake? Either way, it explained so much about his behavior now, his reluctance to stand up to her, his constant need to please her. But it also made me question my own place in his life. If he hadn't fought for his marriage, how could I expect him to fight for ours? Carmen's shadow loomed larger with each passing day. She didn't just call Samuel for emergencies, she made herself a permanent fixture in our lives. One day, I overheard her on the phone with Samuel. "You're really going to miss Jack's soccer game because of her?" Carmen's voice dripped with contempt. "He's your son, Samuel. Doesn't he deserve better than a part-time dad?" I could hear Samuel's weak response, "Carmen, I'm not a part-time dad. I'll be there, okay?" When he hung up, I confronted him. "Why do you let her talk to you like that? Why don't you stand up for yourself, for us?" He looked at me, exhausted. "Because it's not worth the fight, Maddie. She'll make things harder for Jack if I push back." "And what about me?" I asked, tears stinging my eyes. "What about our child? Don't we deserve better than this?" His silence was deafening. It wasn't just the phone calls. Carmen found new ways to insert herself into our lives, each one more infuriating than the last. She sent Samuel pictures of Jack during family outings, always making sure to include herself in the frame. She posted long, sentimental captions about their little family, conveniently omitting any mention of me. One night, she called Samuel in tears, claiming her car had broken down on the way home from work. "I'll go help her," Samuel said, already reaching for his keys. I blocked his path. "She can call a tow truck. You don't need to run to her every time something goes wrong." "She's Jack's mother," he said firmly. "I can't just ignore her." "She's your ex-wife," I shouted. "And I'm your fiancé. Or have you forgotten that?" For a moment, he looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Then he shook his head. "I'll be back soon," he muttered, brushing past me, again. I started to notice changes in Samuel. He became more and more colder, more distant. He stopped asking about my day, stopped touching my belly to feel the baby kick. It was like he was slipping away from me, one piece at a time. And Carmen noticed. She took every opportunity to rub salt in the wound. "You know, Samuel and I used to be so happy together," she said one day when I ran into her at the grocery store. "I wonder if he'll ever find that kind of happiness again." Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I tried to focus on my work, but even there, I couldn't escape the tension. Jason noticed my struggles and began offering quiet words of encouragement. "You're stronger than this," he told me one evening after a particularly rough day. "Don't let them drag you down." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this mess, a way to reclaim my happiness. Chapter 4. I realized I couldn't keep living like this when Samuel missed my first ultrasound appointment. It wasn't just that he didn't show up, it was the lack of explanation, the absence of an apology. I had waited in the hospital for over an hour, staring at the door, hoping he'd burst in with a sheepish smile and a bouquet of flowers. But he never came. When I got home, I found him on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "How was it?" he asked, his tone flat, as if I'd been out running errands and not witnessing the first image of our child. "You would know if you'd been there," I said, barely able to keep the anger out of my voice. He sighed, putting his phone down. Carmen called. Jack wasn't feeling well, and she needed help. "Again?" I snapped. "There's always something with her, isn't there?" He rubbed his temples, clearly tired of the conversation. "Maddie, you knew what you were getting into when we started this. Jack is my son. He'll always come first. And what about this baby?" I shouted, placing a protective hand over my belly. "Doesn't he or she deserve to come first too?" He didn't answer. Instead, he got up and walked into the kitchen, effectively ending the discussion. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Samuel was next to me, but the distance between us felt insurmountable. I thought about the life I had envisioned for us, a life filled with love, laughter, and the joy of raising our child together. But that life was a fantasy, and I was finally ready to admit it. The next morning, I made a decision. I didn't tell Samuel right away. Instead, I reached out to my boss, Jason, and asked about the transfer I'd been considering for months. Jason didn't hesitate. "The position in the overseas branch is still open," he said. "Are you sure about this, Maddie? It's a big move." I nodded, though he couldn't see me through the phone. "I'm sure. I need a fresh start." "All right," he said. "I'll handle everything. Just let me know when you're ready." It was the first time in months that I felt like someone was on my side. A week later, I told Samuel about my plans, though not the full truth. "I'm going on a trip with some friends," I said casually over dinner. He barely looked up from his plate. "Have fun." That was it. No questions, no concern. He didn't even ask when I'd be back. The day I left, I packed my bags, while Samuel was at work. Jason picked me up, and we drove straight to the airport. As the plane took off, I felt a mix of fear and relief. I was leaving behind the man I once thought I'd spend my life with, but I was also leaving behind the constant pain and frustration that had consumed me for so long. The overseas branch was everything I needed, a clean slate, a chance to focus on my career and prepare for my baby's arrival. Jason was a constant source of support, helping me settle in and offering encouragement when I doubted myself. Starting over in a new country wasn't easy, but it was exactly what I needed. The city buzzed with energy, its streets alive with possibilities. For the first time in years, I felt free from Carmen's interference, Samuel's indifference, and the weight of unfulfilled promises. Jason had secured me a cozy apartment close to the office and next to him. It was nothing extravagant, but it was mine. The first night, I sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below me, and I allowed myself to breathe. "I can do this," I whispered to myself, my hand resting on my growing belly. For us. Work became my refuge. Jason had been nothing but supportive, helping me transition smoothly into my new role. He made sure I didn't overwork myself, often bringing me tea during long meetings or reminding me to take breaks. "You're glowing," he said one afternoon as we reviewed quarterly reports. I laughed, brushing off the compliment. "That's just the pregnancy hormones." "No," he said, his voice soft. "It's more than that. You're happier here, Maddie. It shows." His words stayed with me. He was right. I was happier, not completely healed, but getting there. When my son Eric was born, it felt like my entire world shifted. Holding him for the first time, I was overwhelmed with love and determination. This tiny human depended on me, and I vowed to give him everything Samuel hadn't given me, unwavering love and support. Jason was there every step of the way. He was the one who drove me to the hospital when my contractions started, held my hand through the delivery, and cried when Eric let out his first wail. "He's perfect," Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, he is," I replied, tears streaming down my face. Over the next few months, Jason became more than just a friend and boss. He was there for the late-night feedings, the diaper changes, and the moments of sheer exhaustion when I didn't think I could go on. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching Eric sleep, he turned to me. "You're incredible, Maddie," he said. "The way you've handled everything. I admire you so much." I looked at him, my heart swelling. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jason. You've been my rock." He hesitated, then took my hand. "I care about you, more than you know. And I'll wait as long as it takes for you to be ready." His words caught me off guard, but they also warmed me. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Back home, Samuel's life was unraveling. At first, he didn't notice my absence, too preoccupied with Carmen and Jack. But as days turned into weeks, he began to worry. He called my phone incessantly, leaving voicemails filled with a mix of frustration and concern. "Maddie, where are you? Why aren't you answering?" When he finally realized I wasn't coming back, he panicked. He even went to my parents' house, demanding answers. She needed to get away, my mother told him coldly. And I don't blame her. Without me, Samuel struggled to maintain balance. Carmen's demands increased, and Jack grew resentful of his constant absence. Meanwhile, the realization of what he'd lost began to sink in. He found himself looking at old photos of us, smiling, happy, full of hope. He replayed memories in his mind, wondering where it had all gone wrong. But deep down, he knew the answer. Chapter 6, Jason and I were building something beautiful, something I had never thought possible after all the pain. His patience and kindness were a constant in my life, and as the months passed, my feelings for him grew stronger. Eric adored him. Jason wasn't just a supportive friend to me anymore, he was becoming a father figure to my son. He was the one who sang lullabies to Eric when he cried at night, the one who carried him on his shoulders during our weekend walks, and the one who never failed to make me feel safe and loved. One quiet evening, as we sat on the living room floor playing with Eric, Jason looked at me with an intensity that made my heart flutter. "I've been waiting for the right moment to say this," he began, his voice steady. "I love you, Maddie. I've loved you for a long time. I know you've been through so much, and I never want to rush you, but I want you to know that I'm here, for you and for Eric, for as long as you'll have me." Tears welled up in my eyes as I took in his words. "Jason, I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I love you too. You've been my light through everything, and I can't imagine my life without you." From that moment on, we weren't just partners raising a child together. We were a family. Jason proposed 6 months later, on a beautiful spring evening. We were in the park, Eric toddling around in the grass, when Jason knelt down and held out a simple yet elegant ring. "Maddie, you've given me more than I could ever ask for, a son, a purpose, and a love I never thought I'd find. Will you marry me?" "Yes," I whispered, tears streaming down my face as Eric clapped his tiny hands. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Samuel's life with Carmen was falling apart. What once seemed like a rekindled romance had turned into a nightmare. Carmen's manipulative tendencies were worse than ever, and her focus on her own needs left little room for Samuel or their son Jack. Jack, now 10, had begun to notice the tension. He often asked Samuel why Mommy and Daddy were always fighting, but Samuel had no answers. Carmen, on the other hand, was far from subtle about her disdain. She frequently criticized Samuel, comparing him to her childhood friend, whom, unbeknownst to Samuel, she had started seeing again. The truth came out one night when Samuel found text messages on her phone. Furious, he confronted her. "You're doing this again? After everything I've sacrificed for you and Jack," he shouted. Carmen smirked, unfazed. "Don't act so righteous, Samuel. You've always been too weak to hold on to me." Their fights escalated, and soon the cracks in their fragile reconciliation were impossible to ignore. Carmen's infidelity wasn't just emotional, it was physical. Samuel caught her sneaking out late one night and followed her. When he saw her with her childhood friend, his world shattered. To make matters worse, he overheard a conversation that confirmed his deepest fear: Jack wasn't his biological son. "I told you he'd never suspect," Carmen's lover said, laughing. "I know," Carmen replied smugly. "He's too soft to question anything for Jack's sake." Samuel was livid. Years of manipulation and betrayal culminated in a moment of pure rage. He will file for divorce, this time citing infidelity and demanding a paternity test. When the results came back, proving Jack wasn't his son, Samuel felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. He loved Jack, but the betrayal was too much to bear. 6 years later, I returned to the country with Jason and Eric to visit my family. Eric was now a spirited 5-year-old with Jason's kindness and my stubbornness. We were happy, thriving, and looking forward to reconnecting with loved ones. But fate had other plans. As we strolled down a busy street, we came across a scene that stopped us in our tracks. Samuel was in the middle of the sidewalk, shouting at Carmen, who was sobbing and trying to shield herself from his blows. Passers-by had gathered, some recording the spectacle on their phones. "You lied to me. You destroyed my life," Samuel roared. Carmen wailed, "I'm sorry. Please, Samuel, stop." Oh, so it seems that Samuel can stand up to himself and fight against Carmen's manipulation after all. It was then that Samuel's eyes locked on mine. He froze, his face a mixture of shock and regret. "Maddie," he called out, his voice breaking. Jason stepped forward, putting a protective arm around me. "Leave her alone, Samuel," he said firmly. Carmen glared at me through her tears, her hatred palpable. "Of course, it's you," she spat. "You always had to ruin everything." But I wasn't the same woman she used to manipulate. I met her gaze calmly. "No, Carmen. You ruined yourself." Eric tugged on my hand, looking up at Jason. "Daddy, who's that man?" Samuel's expression crumbled as he realized the child in front of him, the one with his eyes and smile, was his son. "Eric," he whispered, stepping closer. But Eric ran to Jason, wrapping his arms around his legs. "Daddy, I'm scared," he said, burying his face in Jason's shirt. Jason picked him up, his eyes hard as he looked at Samuel. "He's my son. Don't you dare try to take that from him." Samuel's shoulders slumped, defeat washing over him as he watched us walk away. Chapter 8, Samuel spiraled after our encounter. The image of Eric calling Jason Daddy had shattered whatever pride he had left. Over the next few days, I received countless messages and calls from him. Each one was more desperate than the last. "Maddie, please, we can fix this," one voicemail pleaded. "Eric is my son. He belongs with me. We belong together." When I didn't respond, Samuel showed up at my parents' house, where we were staying. He waited outside for hours, begging to see Eric. Jason had to confront him, calmly but firmly, telling him to leave. Samuel's desperation turned to anger. The next day, I received a formal letter from his lawyer. He was threatening to take me to court for custody of Eric. My heart pounded as I read the words, bile rising in my throat. Jason found me trembling in the kitchen, the letter clutched in my hands. "He won't take Eric from you," Jason assured me, his voice steady. "We'll fight this together." 2 days later, I was preparing myself for a potential legal battle when the news broke. I hadn't heard from Samuel since his lawyer's letter, but the world had. A video of him and Carmen arguing on the street had gone viral. It showed Samuel shouting at her, accusing her of ruining his life, and even slapping her as passers-by watched in shock. The media exploded with the story. Headlines ranged from "Local businessman's public meltdown" to "Domestic dispute goes viral." It wasn't long before Carmen's dirty laundry was aired as well. Someone leaked details of her affair with her childhood friend, and even Jack's questionable paternity became public knowledge. Carmen's world collapsed overnight. Her lover, the same man who had been the cause of her infidelity during her marriage to Samuel, was nothing more than a manipulative freeloader. He had drained her finances, left her in debt, and fled when the scandal hit. Now penniless, Carmen was left with no choice but to return to her childhood home. But her family, embarrassed by her public disgrace, wanted nothing to do with her. Jack, who had always been her one source of comfort, began to resent her for the life she had dragged him into. Her lover eventually returned, but only to marry her for convenience. He was abusive, jobless, and cruel, and Carmen found herself trapped in a loveless marriage. As for Samuel, the custody threat turned out to be an empty one. His legal team advised him to drop the case, pointing out that the video of his violent outburst had already ruined his reputation. Any judge would view him as unfit to parent. I thought that would be the end of it, but Samuel wasn't done. He showed up at my house one afternoon, waiting outside with dark circles under his eyes and a desperate look on his face. "Madeline, please," he said, blocking my path as I tried to leave. "I've lost everything. Carmen destroyed me, but you can save me. We can start over." "For Eric." I crossed my arms, steeling myself. "You had your chance, Samuel. I begged you to put us first, but you chose Carmen every time. It's too late." He grabbed my hand, his voice trembling. "I was stupid. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. Please, Maddie. I love you." Jason appeared behind me, his presence a wall of calm strength. "She doesn't need you, Samuel. Walk away." Samuel's eyes flicked to Jason, then back to me. "You can't replace me, Maddie. Eric is my son. I'll fight for him if I have to." Publicly humiliated, financially drained, and emotionally shattered, Samuel filed for divorce from Carmen, accusing her and her lover of adultery. He demanded alimony and compensation, which the court granted. Carmen, now broke and married to an abusive man, was forced to pay Samuel monthly support, a cruel irony, given how she had used him for so long. As for me, I didn't wait for Samuel to make another move. Jason and I, along with Eric and our parents, left the country shortly after the custody threat. We built a new life far away from Samuel's chaos. One evening, I called Samuel for the last time. "You'll never see Eric again," I told him, my voice calm but firm. "Not until he's 18. And by then, he'll decide for himself if he wants anything to do with you." Samuel begged, pleaded, even cried, but my decision was final. A year later, Jason and I welcomed another child, a beautiful baby boy we named Justin. Our family was complete, and my heart was full. Samuel, on the other hand, spent his days alone, haunted by the life he had lost. Carmen remained trapped in her miserable marriage, her lover-turned-husband treating her with the same disdain she had once shown me. In the end, they were both victims of their own selfishness, while I found the happiness they had tried to take from me.